Tonight, a seat in first class would ignite a storm of assumptions, judgments, and silent power. One woman's calm defiance was about to turn a routine flight into a viral lesson on dignity and ownership. Before we go any further, if you believe stories of quiet courage deserve to be seen and heard, hit that like and subscribe button now. By subscribing, you help stories like Imani Brooks reach people who need inspiration most, and remind the world that sometimes, the strongest voice is the one that stays silent. Imani Brooks stopped at the aisle and froze. Seat 2A, her seat, purchased months in advance, reserved under her name, was already occupied. A young woman with platinum blonde curls lounged with headphones in, phone streaming live, capturing every flick of her hand and every smug smirk. Imani inhaled slowly, steadying herself. Her voice, calm but firm, cut through the soft hum of the cabin. "Excuse me. I believe you might be in my seat." The woman barely looked up. "This is my seat. Maybe check your ticket." Imani held out her boarding pass, crisp and professional. 2A, first class. A smirk spread across the blonde's face. "Well, I'm 2A too. Maybe they double-booked. Happens all the time." Before tension escalated, a flight attendant appeared, tall, composed, neat bun, practiced smile. "Is there a problem?" "She's trying to take my seat," the blonde said, leaning toward the phone, clearly hoping for a viral moment. All eyes turned toward Imani. Calm, steady, unyielding, she handed over her boarding pass. The attendant examined it carefully, hesitated, then looked back at Imani with subtle uncertainty. "Please wait while I check with the gate," she said. Phones tilted. Passengers whispered. The livestream comments exploded. "She's trying to sneak into first class. Call security." "Hello," she's so calm though. Imani didn't flinch. "I'll wait," she said quietly, letting her composure speak louder than any outburst. Minutes stretched. The attendant returned, voice tight with forced courtesy. "Ms. Brooks, we're still verifying the ticketing system. There appears to be a glitch." Imani's gaze remained steady. "There is no glitch. I purchased this seat directly. Perhaps check under corporate travel." The live streamer leaned closer, voice brimming with excitement. "Guys, this is wild. First-class fraud in real time." Comments scrolled faster than the plane could climb. "She's too calm to be guilty. Something's up. Check the airline, maybe she's rich lol." Then the captain appeared, hat tucked under one arm, calm yet commanding. "What's happening here?" The flight attendant explained, voice low. The captain's eyes narrowed at the mention of a glitch. He looked at Imani's boarding pass, then at Imani herself. Finally, he gestured toward the curtain separating first class from the cockpit. "Ms. Brooks, would you mind following me for a private word?" Imani rose smoothly, every inch the picture of composure, leaving a cabin full of passengers staring at their phones and the drama they hadn't expected. The curtain fell behind her and the tension in the cabin thickened. No one, no passenger, no crew member, not even the influencer streaming, knew the full truth about the woman in seat 2A. And yet, in that moment, a lesson was quietly being written. Sometimes dignity is the loudest voice in the room. Imani Brooks didn't arrive at first class by chance. Every step she took, from childhood streets in Atlanta to the glass towers of corporate America, was a testament to resilience, strategy, and quiet determination. Her story was not one of sudden privilege, but of painstaking preparation, the kind that built authority and patience, even in the face of constant scrutiny. Born to parents who valued discipline and empathy in equal measure, Imani learned early that the world would test her in ways it didn't test others. Her father, a community organizer, reminded her that people often judged before they knew. "Imani," he would say, "some will assume you can't do something. That's their weakness, not yours." Her mother, a nurse who worked night shifts to support the family, instilled in her the power of composure. "Never let your anger write the story of your life," she said. "Your strength is in your patience, your dignity, your choices." School was the first proving ground. Teachers underestimated her intelligence. Classmates overlooked her ideas. In classrooms where confidence was assumed, Imani had to earn every ounce of recognition. She learned to speak only when she had the facts, to listen longer than others, and to never allow doubt to dictate her actions. Every small victory, correct answers, projects recognized, leadership roles earned, reinforced her growing belief. Preparation and self-control were far more powerful than loud protests. Her ambition wasn't quiet for lack of fire, it was calculated, precise. In high school, she launched tutoring programs for younger students, organized small community projects, and even brokered a few freelance ventures. Each opportunity taught her lessons about negotiation, leadership and accountability. Most importantly, she discovered the value of ownership, holding authority not because others granted it but because she earned it. College expanded the stakes. Surrounded by peers from wealthier, more connected backgrounds, Imani quickly recognized that talent alone wasn't enough. Opportunities were often given to those who already had access. Bias wasn't always explicit. It came in small, cumulative acts. Her ideas dismissed in group discussions, her leadership overlooked in favor of others, subtle questioning of her competence. And yet she persisted. She excelled academically, joined student government, and strategically built networks that would become invaluable later. She learned how to assert influence quietly, how to move in spaces where she wasn't always welcomed, and how to protect her voice until it mattered most. After college, Imani entered corporate America with a laser focus. Early roles exposed her to both overt and covert discrimination, from colleagues who assumed she was in the wrong position to clients who undervalued her insights. Yet every challenge became a stepping stone. She didn't fight with theatrics or anger. She fought with preparation, facts, and strategy. By her late 20s, she was leading teams, closing multimillion-dollar deals, and quietly building a reputation as someone who could handle impossible situations without losing composure. Investing in Skyward Airlines was both practical and symbolic. She saw the industry's gaps, not just in service but in representation and influence. She knew that true ownership meant more than holding a title. It meant ensuring that spaces she occupied reflected her values. Her stake in the airline gave her authority and a safeguard that others often lacked, but it was also a reflection of decades of quiet, relentless work. By the time she boarded Flight 227, Imani Brooks was not just a passenger. She was an embodiment of every lesson learned in hallways, classrooms, and boardrooms. Every insult she had endured, every assumption made against her, had prepared her for this very moment. Calm, poised, and unshakable, she carried with her not arrogance but quiet power, the kind that doesn't need to be proven in words, only in action. And though passengers on that flight didn't yet know it, every misjudgment they made about her in those first tense minutes was a lesson waiting to unfold. Imani's calm authority wasn't just courtesy. It was the culmination of years of preparation, experience, and ownership that no live stream, smirk, or assumption could ever erase. The late evening terminal at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport hummed with a familiar energy, the rolling of suitcases, the low murmur of travelers, and the distant calls for final boarding. For most passengers, it was routine, a brief pause between destinations. For Imani Brooks, it was another test of patience, an arena where control and composure mattered just as much as a boarding pass. She moved through the crowd with the precision of someone accustomed to navigating spaces where assumptions often preceded introductions. Polished leather carry-on in hand, crisp navy blazer perfectly tailored, she exuded quiet authority. She didn't need to speak for others to notice. Presence was enough. Her boarding pass read first class, seat 2A, nonstop to Los Angeles. The number was more than just a seat. It was a marker of ownership, proof of her stake in the airline, and an acknowledgement of her meticulous planning. She handed her pass to the gate agent, who scanned it quickly, then offered a professional smile. "Have a pleasant flight, Ms. Brooks." Imani returned the smile, her expression calm but alert. Boarding bridges and metal aisles had taught her that patience was power, calm, a weapon. Every interaction, no matter how small, carried weight. Every glance, every hesitation by another, was part of the subtle dance of ownership she had been trained to perform over decades. As she stepped onto the jet bridge, she was aware of the rhythm of the cabin. The overhead lights cast a soft glow on the pristine leather seats. The hum of conversation, the faint clatter of service carts being prepared, the distant whir of engines, everything seemed familiar. She knew this plane, this route, intimately. But tonight, even in a familiar environment, she felt a twinge of anticipation. She had no reason to expect disruption, yet experience had taught her that assumptions traveled faster than facts. Then she saw it. Seat 2A, her seat, was occupied. A young woman with platinum blonde curls reclined casually, one leg draped over the armrest, headphones in, completely absorbed in her phone. But the screen glowed with more than music. It streamed a live video, the world watching every second. Comments scrolled in real time, flashing judgments before they had even taken place. Imani stopped, assessed, and spoke, her voice calm yet firm. "Excuse me. I believe you might be in my seat." The blonde barely glanced up, a smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "This is my seat. Maybe check your ticket." Imani extended her boarding pass with quiet authority. 2A, first class. The woman tilted her head, still streaming, still confident. Well, I'm 2A as well. Maybe they double booked. Happens all the time. The subtle tension in the cabin shifted. Nearby passengers glanced up, sensing drama. Phones tilted instinctively toward the unfolding confrontation. Imani's composure contrasted sharply with the blonde's performative confidence. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't demand attention. She simply stood, calm, ready to let truth and ownership speak for themselves. Before words could escalate further, a flight attendant appeared. Tall, neatly uniformed, bun perfectly in place, she asked with professional neutrality, "Is there a problem?" The blonde leaned toward her phone, voice loud enough for the cabin to hear. "She's trying to take my seat. Can you handle this?" All eyes turned toward Imani. Calm, steady, unwavering, she handed over her boarding pass. The attendant examined it carefully, then glanced back at Imani with subtle hesitation. "Please wait while I check with the gate," she said, her voice tight but polite. Around them, phones tilted higher. Comments in the livestream exploded. "She's trying to sneak into first class. Call security. Watch her calmness, something's up." Imani inhaled slowly, maintaining the same unshakable calm she had cultivated over decades. She didn't answer the livestream. She didn't react to whispers. She waited. Because in her experience, patience was far more effective than argument. As she stood, passengers around her began to notice the subtle power dynamics at play. The blonde's casual arrogance was beginning to falter under the weight of quiet confidence. Eyes shifted, attention sharpened. Even before the attendant returned, it was clear. This confrontation was no ordinary seat dispute. And for those watching live through the phone, the story was just beginning. The cabin hummed with the quiet noise of engines and murmurs of passengers, but in seat 2A, a storm was brewing. Imani Brooks stood with perfect poise, holding her boarding pass, while the platinum blonde woman continued her live broadcast, narrating every moment like a spectacle. "She's trying to steal my seat," the blonde exclaimed, projecting for both camera and cabin. Imani's calm voice, barely above the murmur of conversation, countered with measured authority. "This is my seat. 2A, first class." The flight attendant, a tall woman with a neatly coiled bun and impeccable uniform, took the boarding pass. Her professional smile masked uncertainty, but the tension in her posture betrayed the hesitation of someone caught between protocol and spectacle. "Please wait while I check with the gate," she said. Passengers shifted in their seats, curiosity rippling across first class. Phones tilted instinctively toward the unfolding drama. Some whispered among themselves, some watched in wide-eyed anticipation. Even those not streaming could feel the energy, an unusual quiet charged with unspoken questions. On the blonde's phone, comments exploded. "She's too calm to be guilty, this is wild. Double booking? Oh, can you imagine? Call security now." Imani inhaled slowly. Calmness was her shield. She didn't need to shout or argue. In her experience, facts always mattered more than spectacle, and patience often won battles that anger could not. She had faced bias before, both overt and subtle, and she knew this moment would test more than her patience. It would test the composure of everyone around her. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Every tick of the clock stretched longer, the cabin electric with anticipation. Finally, the flight attendant returned, tablet in hand, her voice controlled but slightly strained. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "we're still verifying the ticketing system. There appears to be a glitch." The words hung in the cabin like smoke, but Imani's expression didn't waver. Her gaze was steady, voice calm yet commanding. "There is no glitch. I purchased this seat directly. Perhaps check under corporate travel." The live streamer leaned forward, excitement brimming. "Guys, this is insane. First-class fraud in real time." Comments scrolled rapidly, almost too fast to follow. "She's calm, too calm. Something's not right. Maybe she's rich, lol. OMG, this is so dramatic." Passengers exchanged glances. Some tilted their phones to catch a better view. Some whispered quietly, unsure who to believe. The tension was palpable. The cabin felt suspended, waiting for someone in authority to tip the balance. Then the subtle shift came, the captain appeared. His presence alone carried a quiet authority, commanding attention without raising his voice. Hat tucked under one arm, eyes focused, he asked simply, "What's happening here?" The flight attendant explained quickly, quietly, choosing her words with care. The captain's eyes narrowed at the mention of a glitch, flicking between Imani's boarding pass and Imani herself. He gestured toward the curtain that separated first class from the cockpit. "Miss Brooks, would you mind following me for a private word?" Imani rose smoothly, every movement deliberate, calm, composed. The entire cabin watched in suspended anticipation. Phones clicked, live streamers whispered into their mics, and the blonde's smirk faltered ever so slightly. As she followed the captain behind the curtain, the cabin seemed to exhale collectively, aware that the confrontation was far from over, but that the woman in seat 2A was not ordinary. Every observer sensed it even if they couldn't articulate why. Her calm was not fear or hesitation. It was authority, patience and ownership condensed into a quiet, unwavering presence. Even through the doors of the galley she carried an aura of control. The glitch may have cast doubt in others' minds, but Imani knew the truth, and she knew that truth had a way of asserting itself, especially when backed by years of preparation and quiet resilience. Back in the cabin, passengers whispered. The blonde shifted nervously in her seat, fingers tapping against the armrest. Every phone in first class seemed to tilt toward the unfolding story, capturing not just an argument over a seat, but the electric tension between assumption and truth. And while the livestream comments grew ever more frantic, Imani remained calm. She understood something her observers didn't yet. The real power in this cabin was not in the voices that shouted or streamed, but in the quiet authority of a woman who had spent her life earning every inch of respect she claimed, and would not surrender it now. The galley behind the first-class curtain was quiet, almost painfully so. The hum of the engines and the distant chatter of passengers faded into the background as the captain's presence anchored the space. Hat tucked neatly under one arm, he regarded Imani Brooks with a mixture of professional scrutiny and respect. "Ms. Brooks," he said in a low, measured voice, "I've just reviewed your reservation. Your seat is unquestionably yours." Imani's expression remained calm, her voice steady as she replied, "Then why the delay?" The captain exhaled, a subtle weight in his shoulders betraying the frustration of having to navigate human error and assumption at 35,000 feet. "It appears someone questioned the legitimacy of your ticket." Imani's gaze didn't waver. "Someone assumed I didn't belong." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a lifetime spent confronting bias and skepticism. She didn't need to raise her voice, nor did she need to plead her case. The facts, her ownership and her composure spoke volumes. The captain nodded once, decisively. "I'll handle this." They returned to the cabin together. Passengers, phones raised, whispered and streamed, sensing that the moment of truth had arrived. The blonde woman, caught mid-live stream, was still seated with her headphones dangling, eyes darting nervously as she finally registered the captain's approach. "Miss Blake," he said firmly, showing her the tablet with the corrected seat assignment. "Your ticket is for 3C. Please relocate immediately." Gasps rippled across the cabin. Phones tilted, fingers tapped, and livestream comments exploded. She lied. OMG, the calm lady was right. Respect to the captain. Madison Blake, her name now confirmed on the tablet, flushed crimson. She gathered her bag with trembling hands, muttering about system errors, though the cameras and eyes of first class made her excuses hollow. Imani stepped aside without a word, allowing the woman to pass. Her calm was deliberate, her restraint a lesson in authority. She didn't need to speak to be heard. Her composure commanded respect more effectively than any outburst could. She returned to her seat, 2A, and slid into the leather chair with a quiet elegance that contrasted sharply with the chaos that had erupted moments earlier. She opened a hardcover book as if nothing had happened, yet every passenger in first class had witnessed a lesson unfold, one in ownership, patience, and dignity. Even the flight attendant, who had initially hesitated when confronted with the glitch, returned with a hushed apology. "Ms. Brooks, on behalf of our crew, I want to apologize." Imani looked up briefly, calm and unwavering. "Your apology is noted. Let's focus on a safe flight. No lecture. No anger. Just quiet authority." By the time Flight 227 leveled off above the clouds, the story had already begun to ripple far beyond the cabin. Phones buzzed with notifications. Live streams replayed the confrontation. Comments scrolled endlessly. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just owned it. This is the CEO of the airline. No wonder she handled it like that. Across the aisle, Madison Blake refreshed her own feed. The initial excitement of exposing a seat thief had vanished, replaced by mounting scrutiny. Hearts and laughing emojis were replaced with sharp questions. Why did you assume she wasn't in the right seat? Do you realize who she is? The smirk that had once been so casual now trembled, exposed by cameras, passengers, and the reality that assumptions could only hold power for so long. Meanwhile, Imani's phone vibrated constantly with messages. Investors seeking reassurance, friends sending screenshots of the viral live stream, reporters requesting interviews. She ignored them all, focused only on the flight, on her own presence, and on the knowledge that the truth had asserted itself without theatrics or anger. And yet, even in her quiet composure, Imani knew that the impact of this moment would extend far beyond the walls of the cabin. She understood, as she always had, that ownership was not just about holding a seat or a title, it was about holding space, commanding respect, and letting truth speak louder than assumptions. Passengers settled into their seats, still whispering, still recording, still witnessing a demonstration of power they could not replicate. And in the midst of it all, Imani Brooks remained serene, a testament to the idea that sometimes the loudest authority is the quietest, the strongest resistance is the calmest, and the most lasting influence comes not from anger but from restraint. The moment Madison Blake stood and shuffled toward her assigned seat, the cabin exhaled collectively. Phones remained raised, live streams continued, and the subtle tension that had built over the past 20 minutes finally began to shift, but the ripple effect was just beginning. Imani Brooks settled back into seat 2A, opened her hardcover book with deliberate calm, as though the chaos of the previous moments belonged to someone else entirely. Yet every eye in first class remained fixed on her. Some passengers whispered quietly, sharing impressions with each other. She didn't yell. She didn't fight. She just owned it. I've never seen anyone handle a situation like that before. She's so calm, it's almost intimidating. Phones vibrated and screens glowed as passengers refreshed the live stream feed. Comments had exploded, the audience now numbering in the hundreds of thousands. She didn't even raise her voice. Respect. That's how you handle it. CEO of the airline? No wonder she handled it like that. Even Madison Blake, seated now in 3C, could feel the heat of attention pressing down on her. Her polished smile was gone, replaced by quiet panic as she scrolled through the growing number of comments calling out her assumptions. Hearts, laughing emojis, and playful gifs were replaced by sharp questions. Why did you assume she didn't belong? Do you realize who she is? Growth comes from humility, not assumptions. Dana, the lead flight attendant, approached Imani discreetly. Her voice was low, tinged with sincerity. Ms. Brooks, on behalf of our crew, I want to apologize for the confusion and delay. Imani looked up briefly, expression neutral, steady. Your apology is noted. Let's focus on a safe flight. No lecture, no drama, just authority conveyed through composure. In that simple acknowledgement, Dana understood something profound. This was more than a seat dispute, it was a lesson in respect, ownership, and patience. Passengers began sharing their own recordings, each clip showing new angles of the confrontation. The captain's quiet but decisive handling of the situation, the blonde woman's faltering confidence, and Imani's calm, composed demeanor became part of an instant narrative. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the story was no longer confined to Flight 227. It was spilling into social media, news feeds, and group chats across the country. Even casual observers, initially indifferent to a first-class drama, now found themselves drawn in. Questions circulated widely. What does it mean to truly hold space? How does calm authority confront assumption? Can quiet confidence outweigh spectacle? Imani's phone vibrated relentlessly. Investor messages, media inquiries, and concerned friends flooded her notifications. Yet she remained composed, choosing to observe rather than react. This was the moment she had been prepared for, not because she sought attention, but because truth, when anchored in patience and ownership, could never be ignored. By now, the cabin had settled into an uneasy calm. Some passengers returned to their own devices, others whispered in groups, and a few simply stared, absorbing the lesson silently. The atmosphere was different now. Respect was tangible, almost electric, moving through the rows of seats like an invisible current. Meanwhile, Madison Blake's livestream replay continued to climb, crossing hundreds of thousands of views within the hour. Viewers across the country watched the unfolding story, many unaware of the identities involved, but captivated by the contrast between assumption and authority. The blonde's narrative of exposing bad service quickly dissolved under the weight of undeniable truth. Imani Brooks had purchased the seat, and she had done so with a calm, commanding presence that could not be challenged. By the time the first drinks were served, Flight 227 had become more than a routine cross-country trip. It had become a lesson on bias, composure, and ownership in the face of public scrutiny. Passengers, whether actively streaming or quietly observing, carried with them the memory of a woman who had transformed a simple seat dispute into a masterclass in dignity and authority. And somewhere above the clouds, Imani Brooks sat quietly in 2A, eyes on her book, mind calm, knowing the impact of what had just unfolded was already moving far beyond the cabin walls. The real story was only beginning. By the time Flight 227 broke through the clouds above Atlanta, the confrontation in first class had already escaped the confines of the cabin. Live streams, clips, and screenshots spread like wildfire across social media platforms. Every device, from phones to tablets, carried fragments of the story: a calm black woman asserting her rightful seat, a flustered passenger exposed, and a captain quietly ensuring fairness. The hashtags multiplied within hours. Hashtag Seat2A, hashtag Imani Brooks, hashtag Airline Accountability. Twitter feeds, Instagram stories, TikTok videos, and news alerts all carried the same narrative. Black CEO's seat stolen in first class, and she owns part of the airline, became the headline that dominated timelines across the nation. Newsrooms scrambled to confirm details. Reporters phoned the airline, checked public records, and dug for statements. By the time Flight 227 crossed state lines, the story had moved beyond first-class drama. It was a conversation about race, privilege, and ownership that resonated deeply with millions. The runway lights of Los Angeles International Airport stretched like a river of stars below Flight 227 as it descended through the night sky. Inside first class, calm had returned, at least on the surface. Passengers quietly buckled in, still digesting what had happened in Seat 2A. Phones buzzed incessantly with notifications, live streams continued, and social media feeds were ablaze with commentary. Imani Brooks, seated in her rightful place, closed her book and allowed herself a moment to glance out the window. The city sprawled beneath her, a mosaic of lights and shadows. Everything below seemed to mirror the complex landscape of assumptions and judgments she had navigated in the air. She inhaled slowly, steady, composed, her presence a quiet anchor amid the storm her calm had unleashed. The descent continued, and soon the plane touched down. Engines roared, tires kissed asphalt, and the familiar rhythm of landing brought Flight 227 to a halt at its gate. But there was nothing routine about this arrival. Reporters, cameras flashing, and news vans lined the terminal. A media frenzy that had grown in real time, tracking the viral story that now dominated social feeds nationwide. Passengers moved toward the exit, phones in hand, capturing the final moments, eager to preserve every angle of what had become more than a seat dispute. Whispers carried across the cabin. "She's really the CEO of the airline. She didn't even argue once. Did you see how calm she was?" The crew moved efficiently, guiding passengers toward the jet bridge, but all eyes were drawn toward the calm figure of Imani Brooks, who rose from 2A with graceful composure. Her bag rested lightly on her arm, polished shoes striking quietly against the cabin floor. Each step seemed deliberate, measured, an extension of the authority she carried effortlessly. Outside the plane, a wall of cameras and microphones awaited. Reporters jostled, questions shouted over each other, flashes of light punctuated the night. "Ms. Brooks, can you comment on what happened? Did you expect this kind of reaction? How does it feel to have your seat disputed on your own airline?" Imani stopped at the top of the jet bridge, turning to face the sea of microphones with quiet poise. Her expression was calm, unreadable, commanding respect without a single raised voice. She took a breath and offered a single measured sentence. "Tonight was not about me. It was about how quickly we decide who belongs and who doesn't. I hope this serves as a lesson." That was all. No lectures, no long explanations, just a concise statement that carried the weight of experience, authority, and dignity. Reporters scribbled notes frantically, cameras zoomed, and the words spread instantly across social media. Every live stream, tweet, and video clip captured the same moment: calm authority triumphing over chaos, assumption, and spectacle. As she continued down the jet bridge, she made eye contact with passengers who had witnessed the event firsthand. There were nods of respect, whispered thanks, and glances that acknowledged her composure. The cabin, now emptying, seemed to echo the lesson she had quietly imparted. Even Madison Blake, seated earlier in 3C, observed from a distance. The impact of the viral incident, compounded by Imani's composed response to reporters, was undeniable. Embarrassment and reflection replaced performance and arrogance. She finally understood, in a public and irreversible way, that assumptions could never outweigh truth and preparation. By the time Imani reached the tarmac, the airport's chaos had grown. News vans, journalists, and cameras followed every step of her exit. And yet, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the real power didn't come from being seen, but from knowing the facts and standing firm in them. Passengers and crew alike watched as she disappeared into the California night, a figure of authority and dignity that needed no amplification. Her presence had transformed a routine flight into a national conversation, her calm demeanor becoming the defining image of the viral moment. Flight 227 had landed. The plane was emptying. But the story of Seat 2A, of patience, authority, and quiet power, was only beginning to take flight across the nation. By the morning after Flight 227 landed, the story of Seat 2A had become impossible to ignore, not just in the public eye but inside the walls of Skyward Airlines headquarters. Executive offices, normally reserved for strategic planning and quarterly reports, were now alive with conversations about culture, accountability, and perception. Investors called frantically. Analysts requested briefings. The viral incident had exposed not a flaw in the airline's operations, but a vulnerability in its culture. One mismanaged assumption on the part of a crew member could ripple through the company's reputation and, by extension, its stock performance. Every executive understood that Flight 227 was a wake-up call. Thomas Callahan, the airline CEO, convened an emergency meeting with the board of directors. The screens in the conference room displayed the viral clips. Imani Brooks, composed, unwavering, asserting her rightful seat while passengers and crew looked on. Madison Blake's flustered retreat replayed repeatedly. The contrast was stark and the lesson unmistakable. "This isn't just about a seat," Thomas said, voice steady, measured. "It's about respect, authority, and how our employees interpret situations when assumptions override facts." Imani's response was exemplary, and we must ensure that our company reflects that standard. Days after Flight 227 landed, the story of Seat 2A had taken on a life of its own. It was no longer simply a viral incident. It had become a national conversation. Civil rights organizations issued statements praising Imani Brooks for her composure, calling the event a masterclass in dignity under pressure. Panels were organized to discuss the broader implications of bias, assumptions, and respect in public spaces. Schools, universities, and community groups hosted discussions inspired by the viral footage. One college in Los Angeles organized a seminar titled, "Who Gets to Sit in Seat 2A?" inviting students to analyze the incident from perspectives of race, privilege, authority, and ethics. Videos of Imani's calm intervention were shown repeatedly, prompting debates about leadership, restraint, and ownership. The days following Flight 227 were relentless for Madison Blake. The viral footage of her flustered retreat from 2A had followed her everywhere. Social media, news segments, and countless private messages. Each notification on her phone felt like a reminder of the assumptions she had made, the momentary lapse of judgment, and the humiliation that had been broadcast to millions. At first, Madison tried to laugh it off, pretending to friends and followers that the backlash was simply internet chaos. But the intensity of public scrutiny quickly pierced through her bravado. Sponsors paused collaborations. Friends whispered about what they'd seen online. Even her own family struggled to understand why a simple seat mix-up had become a national discussion. It wasn't long before she realized that Flight 227 had exposed more than a boarding mistake. It had revealed her own assumptions, her unexamined biases, and the fragility of entitlement when confronted with truth. Madison began to feel a growing weight in her chest, a mix of embarrassment, guilt, and understanding that she could no longer ignore. One evening, alone in her apartment, she watched the Livestream replay yet again. The calmness of Imani Brooks, the subtle but firm intervention of the captain, the quiet respect of passengers, it all struck Madison differently this time. She could no longer dismiss the incident as mere coincidence or bad luck. For the first time, she truly saw what she had assumed, that appearances and privilege could override facts. And she saw, more importantly, the cost of that assumption. Months had passed since Flight 227, yet the story of Seat 2A continued to ripple across corporate offices, social media feeds, and public discourse. Imani Brooks, now more than ever, understood the quiet power of influence, how a single moment of composure could inspire systemic change, cultural reflection, and personal growth in ways that headlines alone could not capture. Within Skyward Airlines, her presence became even more significant. She had quietly increased her stake not to dominate but to protect. Board meetings now carried her subtle influence. Decisions about customer experience, staff training, and internal culture reflected the lessons learned from that viral night. Flight attendants received enhanced training emphasizing not only procedure but empathy and discretion. Managers discussed bias awareness as part of standard leadership development. The culture shift was underway, shaped less by spectacle and more by consistent, strategic reinforcement of integrity and respect. Outside the airline, Imani's story continued to serve as a blueprint for leadership. Universities analyzed Flight 227 in ethics and leadership courses. Leadership coaches used the viral incident to illustrate how calm, prepared, and fact-driven authority could overcome assumptions and hostility. Public figures and civil rights leaders referenced the event in speeches, emphasizing that quiet composure can catalyze systemic reflection. Even in the art world, Flight 227 became an emblem of dignity and restraint. Digital artists, illustrators, and filmmakers recreated the moment in exhibitions, animations, and short films. Social media remained alive with tributes. Graphics showing Imani calmly seated in 2A, quotes highlighting her composure, and reinterpretations of her calm stance as a symbol of empowerment. Imani herself remained selective in engagement. She declined interviews, book deals, and speaking engagements, understanding that the power of the story lay in its dissemination by others, not in self-promotion. The lesson had already traveled further than she could have imagined. Instead, she focused on strategic influence, boardroom decisions, and investment oversight, ensuring her presence continued to shape systemic change without fanfare. Meanwhile, conversations continued to ripple in society. Students wrote essays about Flight 227, framing it as a story about dignity, patience, and accountability. Families used the incident to teach children about fairness, restraint, and personal responsibility. Corporations across industries referenced the flight in internal training sessions, emphasizing respect, bias awareness, and the value of fact-based decision-making over assumptions. Even Madison Blake's journey of reflection and apology became part of the broader narrative. Her acknowledgement of error reinforced the lessons Flight 227 had imparted, that assumptions have consequences, and that personal growth often comes from public accountability. The story, layered and multifaceted, continued to resonate as a cultural touchstone. Imani's subtle but strategic moves were quietly reshaping perception. She was no longer just a passenger or shareholder. She was a symbol of leadership defined not by spectacle, but by preparation, dignity, and authority. Her decisions reinforced the principle she had demonstrated on the plane. Quiet ownership is sometimes louder than any voice raised in protest or indignation. Even months later, when she boarded another skyward flight for a global investment summit, the difference was tangible. Gate agents smiled, passengers offered discreet nods of respect, and crew members carried themselves with heightened awareness and professionalism. The culture of ownership, dignity, and preparation was now embedded not just in policy, but in everyday experience. As Imani settled into her seat, she glanced out the window at the rising dawn. The sky looked different now, not because of altitude or geography, but because of the miles she had traveled to shape perception, culture, and human behavior. She whispered a quiet truth to herself. The sky feels different when you know you helped change it. Flight 227 had become more than a viral incident. It was a lesson, a movement, and a symbol of how authority grounded in integrity could inspire reflection, accountability, and long-term change. And Imani Brooks, seated quietly, reminded the world that dignity, patience, and subtle ownership often have the most lasting impact. Years might pass, but the story of Flight 227 remained vivid, a lesson etched into public consciousness. Seat 2A was no longer just a seat. It had become a symbol of dignity, integrity, and quiet courage. Imani Brooks' calm and composed response to an unjust assumption had set in motion a ripple effect felt far beyond the confines of the aircraft, reaching classrooms, boardrooms, social media feeds, and living rooms across the nation. Corporate policies had been rewritten. Training programs emphasized empathy, bias awareness, and respect. Employees across industries cited Flight 227 as a benchmark for handling conflict with composure and factual authority. Airlines, schools, nonprofits, and corporations referenced the incident, recognizing that assumptions could never outweigh truth, preparation, or integrity. Even everyday conversations carried the lesson. Families discussed it at dinner tables. Students referenced it in essays and debates. Friends and colleagues debated who had acted with integrity, who had faltered, and what lessons could be drawn. Flight 227 had transcended its original context, becoming an enduring story about the power of quiet action over spectacle. For Imani Brooks, the impact was not in the accolades or viral attention, but in the subtle transformations her presence had inspired. She continued to increase her influence strategically, through investments, corporate oversight, and mentorship, ensuring that systems reflected fairness, dignity, and accountability. Ownership, she understood, was the most potent form of influence. One that didn't require a microphone, a camera, or a viral moment to be heard. Madison Blake's journey of reflection and apology remained part of the narrative, reinforcing that growth often comes from public accountability. Her story became a companion lesson. Humility, honesty, and personal responsibility are critical components of societal growth. Communities continue to share the story, teaching children about patience, integrity, and standing firm in truth. Social media continued to celebrate Imani's quiet authority, using art, memes, and videos to remind the world that true power often manifests not in noise, but in calm, unwavering conviction. And yet, through all of the recognition, Imani remained characteristically quiet. She had never needed applause, headlines, or virality. The lesson of Flight 227 was far larger than any one individual. It belonged to every person willing to reflect, act with integrity, and challenge assumptions when they arise. Now, years later, new generations of leaders, students, and everyday people continue to reference Seat 2A as a benchmark for dignity and authority. The story is shared not as gossip, but as guidance, about fairness, composure, and the enduring impact of standing firm in truth. And here is the part where you become part of the legacy. If Flight 227, Imani Brooks, and Seat 2A have touched you, challenged you, or inspired you, don't let this story stop here. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment your thoughts, your reflections, your lessons, your own moments of quiet courage. Like this story if you believe dignity and composure are worth celebrating. And most importantly, subscribe. Subscribe because stories like this deserve to be amplified, remembered, and passed on. Every share, every comment, every like is a ripple, just like Flight 227, spreading lessons of respect, authority, and quiet power far beyond one cabin, one city, or one country. Remember, one seat, one stand. One moment of quiet courage can inspire millions. Don't just watch, participate. Share the lesson. Be the ripple. And together, let's ensure that dignity, fairness, and truth never remain grounded. Flight 227 reminded the world that sometimes the loudest power comes from the quietest seat. And now it's your turn to keep that power in motion.